And Ravens are going to need to get used to that because they're going to have another one 2 weeks from now. Luke Jones joins us now from Owings Mills for all things Ravens as we, this is going to set a record for how horrible preseason can be now. I think we all knew that when we got that extra game in Canton that this thing was going to linger longer. I don't know that anybody wants to play Thursday night, right, Luke?
About the only ones who do are guys who still need to do some work to make the team, or guys who aren't going to be on the team and they are trying to put some tape together to get a job elsewhere. I mean, to your point, this has been a particularly brutal preseason from a standpoint of Joe Flacco. I went back and did the math. Of the times that a quarterback has lined up for the Ravens in the preseason, Joe Flacco has been that quarterback 10.4% of the time. So 1 out of every 10 snaps, basically, he's been out there. Terrell Suggs has played a total of 23 snaps in 4 games, and we know he's not going to play on Thursday night. So it's been a lot of the young guys. It's been ugly at times. It's been boring at times. Yeah, there've been some moments, and certainly watching someone like Lamar Jackson run around. And
yeah, I was going to say, of all the preseason, I don't remember the last time we focused on a person in the preseason like this, right? Literally.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. I mean, and that's why we said that this was one of the more anticipated preseasons the Ravens have ever had. I mean, even in 2008, when Joe Flacco was drafted in the first round, it wasn't until Kyle Bowler was banged up and Troy Smith was in the hospital that anyone started looking at Flacco and saying, boy, this kid from Delaware might play week 1. And, it kind of just happened, and the rest was history. But going into that preseason, there was no thought, really, that he was going to be a player for them at least until, maybe the midway point of his rookie year. I mean, I think that's kind of what most people thought. But in the case of Jackson, there's no expectation that he's going to play as the quarterback. I think there are plenty of expectations that he's going to get on the field to utilize his athleticism. But it's been interesting to watch him, and at times it's been painful. But to his credit, he put together his best performance of the preseason on Saturday night, and the run, the athleticism when he takes off. I mean, we knew that. Anyone who saw this kid play at Louisville was aware of what kind of a gifted athlete he is. But to see what he did from the pocket, and I'm not saying it was some earth-shattering, brilliant performance from the pocket, but he did good things. He was accurate on some of his shorter passes, which had been an issue for him. And I think my favorite play of the night for him wasn't the touchdown run or pass. It was the play where he rolled left and kept his eyes down the field and hit Tim White in stride for a nice gain.
There's nothing he does with his feet that I'm amazed by at this point. I mean, I'm just hoping he doesn't get his head taken off every time he runs. The part we're looking for is when he throws the ball, right? Literally, and how he throws it, because it was all over the place last week, literally.
Yeah, I mean, Indianapolis was not pretty. There was no question about that. But like I said, that play where he scrambled left, and it looked like he was going to take off, and it looked like he had room to take off. Instead, he hits Tim White, who picks up 33 yards. I mean, that's what you want to see. Ultimately, if Lamar Jackson's going to be a successful quarterback in this league, and specifically for the Ravens, whether it's next year, whether it's 2 years from now, whatever, it's going to be because he's comfortable enough to make plays consistently from the pocket and to move out of the pocket and not just take off, but keep his eyes downfield and make throws. And if he can do those things, and then you pair that with the athleticism that he has, then watch out, because that's a quarterback who can be special. That's a quarterback who can really be an X factor and a difference maker. So it was good to see that on Saturday. I think what it means for this team, about the only thing that I think it means right now is perhaps that alters the thinking if the Ravens were seriously considering keeping Robert Griffin III, which I think after the Indianapolis game you had to be thinking about that at least. But with the injuries that have started to surface, and I'm sure we'll get into those in the next few minutes, and with Jackson playing his best football of the preseason on Saturday, maybe that tilts the scale a little bit more in favor of just keeping 2 quarterbacks and not keeping Robert Griffin III. But
yeah, well, what is the factor there? Let's, what would be, because Griffin's going to play better than Jackson if he has to play in Week 4, right? If you got to go to Pittsburgh and beat the Steelers on Sunday Night Football, I can't do that with Lamar Jackson in Week 4. I your season is over. Can RG3 save your season if Joe Flacco gets injured in Week 5? I mean, can he? Maybe. I mean, certainly better than Ryan Mallett or some of the other crap we've seen around here. So I don't know how you jettison RG3. I really don't. And, I talked to Billick about this last week, Luke. For me, if you consider Lamar Jackson as a specialist, as a wide receiver, as a running back, as someone that you consider a part of your special teams or an offensive weapon like a fullback or a tight end that's an extra guy, because I don't really consider him a quarterback because I don't think he'll be used as such.
Well, I don't know if I agree with that entirely. I mean, I think at some point in time, and this is the decision the Ravens have made for a decade now, it's been literally 9 years since the Ravens went into a season with 3 quarterbacks, and that includes going into the year with a 6th-round rookie Tyrod Taylor as their backup quarterback in 2011. That goes into that includes Ryan Mallett, as you suggested, being their backup quarterback, and certainly not someone that anyone had any faith in by the time he was at the end of his run. But I think you have to look at the rest of the roster. You have a 53-man roster. You have 46 spots active on game day, and we know Joe Flacco is going to be the starter. We know that Lamar Jackson is going to be at least active because John Harbaugh has said as much. So you're going to take another spot. If you're going to keep him to be your backup, RG3 I'm speaking of, then you're going to have 3 spots devoted to quarterbacks on game day. Well, then there's a cost there. Where are you taking that away from? And who are you giving up that would otherwise be on the 53-man roster? I think it was certainly more plausible a week ago than it feels now. And I don't want to say plausible, meaning that it's not plausible now. It's certainly an option, certainly a consideration more so than it's been in a very long time.
Put a percentage on it right now, because I would have put it at 90% last week.
Yeah, I think that's way too high. I think it's more a 50-50 proposition, if that, because
Jackson threw the ball well the other night.
Well, because I don't think, we're talking about Robert Griffin. This is a guy who's out of the NFL last year. Let's not pretend this guy's Nick Foles. This is a guy who no one wanted last year. And maybe a team might have taken him at the league minimum, and he wasn't interested in that, which is his prerogative. But he was out of the league last year, so I think this is you have to kind of manage the cost and the risk aversion here. And I'm not so convinced that if Joe Flacco goes down for a game or two that they can't steal a win with Lamar Jackson as their backup quarterback.
He might go out there and raise hell with his feet, literally.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. I think there's a case to be made that if it's a short-term injury to Flacco, that they can do enough razzle-dazzle that he can make just enough throws, that you can rely enough on your defense and your running game, that if Flacco misses 2 games, they can win 1 of them. If he misses 3 games, maybe if things go really well, they could win 2 of those. And believe me, it's not to say Jackson comes in and everything's fine. You're going to have growing pains there. But my point is with that, and this has always been my point as far as why I would never invest tons of resources in a backup quarterback, is that if Flacco goes down for longer than that, the season's probably not in good shape at that point. And if you're working under that circumstance, I'd rather see Lamar Jackson play then anyway, because you have to find out about this guy at some point. So why wouldn't you in a situation where your playoff chances are probably maybe not sunk,
diminished?
Yeah, if Joe goes down for the season in Week 5, I'm not buying for a second that Robert Griffin III is leading them to the playoffs. I'm just not. So if that's the case, I'd much rather see Jackson play and take some lumps, and you're going to get, you'll get an earlier draft.
I'm familiar with that. I watched the Orioles play Sunday night.
Sure, right. So, and that's not to say that I think it's out of the question. I don't think it's a fait accompli or a slam dunk or anything like that they're keeping Robert Griffin III. I think now, and it's not nearly as much to do with Jackson, even though he certainly played better on Saturday night, but now you're carrying Hayden Hurst, who's not going to be on the roster for a few weeks, or not going to be a player for at least a few weeks.
And that's going to be Max Williams, right? Like that spot for now.
Right. So, I mean, if you were thinking Max Williams wasn't making the team, now he's going to be on the team because they're going to need him to block because this team uses 2 tight end sets, and the tight ends are critical to their blocking schemes in the running game. And Willie Henry is not going to be a player for a few weeks after having hernia surgery late last week. So you presumably might be carrying an extra defensive lineman now, or at the very least, that's a dead roster spot for you for week 1, 2, and 3, let's just say. So, you're talking about these spots now that you're having to carry a few injured players, which we weren't talking about a week ago. And it's not as though these are devastating season-altering injuries just yet. I mean, the one, Jimmy Smith, is going to be out 4 weeks with the suspension.
Well, that alters your season because of Cincinnati and Pittsburgh and everything we talked about last week.
But from a roster standpoint, you get an extra roster spot for him. So I'm not saying that it dramatically changes things, some of these injuries, but I think it does change things for someone like Robert Griffin III, who, in my mind, was not a slam dunk to make the roster anyway. And now you have these couple roster spots that you're just going to be carrying for guys that are banged up. I think it hurts his case. So I don't know. And again, I'm not saying it's impossible. I certainly hear the merit to it, but I think you have a heck of a lot of players on defense, and I think Saturday was a perfect example of this. This was a defense that didn't have Terrell Suggs, C.J. Mosley, Eric Weddle, Brandon Carr, and Willie Henry, who's expected to start once he's back and healthy because he's lined up as a starter this summer. Those 5 players, who are all starting players and 3 of them Pro Bowl players, they held the Dolphins starters to 2 yards in the first quarter. So that really speaks to the defensive depth that they have. Now, you might be saying, well, if they have that much depth, why can't they carry a Robert Griffin? Okay, I'll hear that side of it. But on the flip side, they have a lot of younger players that aren't necessarily that pertinent on the depth chart right now, but are guys that could be in a couple years. And eventually Eric Weddle's not going to be on this team anymore. And eventually Terrell Suggs isn't going to be on this team anymore. And, well, until they sign him, C.J. Mosley's not under contract after this year. So you go down the list of some of their veterans on the defense, and you see all these talented young defensive players that they have who might not be gigantic factors this year, but you'd sure like to keep them around. Well, if you use that roster spot for Robert Griffin III, that's one less defensive player you can keep around, or whatever it might be, one less tight end, whatever position you want to talk about. So that's kind of where I'm coming from in saying I don't think it's, and I've heard a lot of people share your sentiment that Griffin is maybe not a lock, but feel like he should be a lock. But I don't see it that way. And if I'm wrong, that's fine. But I continue to go back to you drafted this kid to in the first round, and you're not even trusting him to be a backup quarterback right now. I don't know. Where's that jump going to take place then when he's at least good enough to be a backup? I mean, are we talking 2 or 3 years before he's ever in the conversation to be the starting quarterback? I mean,
well, to your point, all summer they used the 1 on him, and the expectations changed then. Period.
Sure. I mean, and that's where I just come down to.
It's not Chris Redman anymore or whatever,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not talking about him being a starter by any means. Joe is the starter. We understand that. And he should be because he's the best quarterback they have by a wide margin right now. But my point is, you invested a first-round pick in this kid, and now you're telling me that you need to carry another quarterback too? That doesn't sound like a good use of resources in the short term. And you used a first-round pick, but in order to use that first-round pick, you gave up your second-round pick that you could have used on another player this year, and you don't have a second-rounder next year. So my point is, you did give up some real assets there, and now you're telling me you need to carry another quarterback because he can't even be your backup. That's where, to me, the smell test there, I don't like that. I just don't. And again, it's not against RG3. This is much more for me about Lamar Jackson, and I'm still not buying that they're going to carry 3. But we'll find out. And a week from now, we'll be talking about Griffin being on this roster and you being totally right and me being totally wrong, or they'll continue their streak of having 2 quarterbacks. But the one factor that you mentioned and Brian Billick alluded to, and we haven't talked about it a ton, but because Jackson is going to be something for them, running back, hybrid, slash, whatever you want to call it. I don't know if he's going to be catching too many passes, but he's going to have the ball in his hands, at least a few times in most games, I would think. So there is the thought that, especially if he's not going to slide and protect his body the way that you'd like to see a quarterback do, maybe you do need to have Griffin on the roster. But again, I go back to it. Are you really going to have 3 quarterbacks active on game day under that scenario? So you're still putting yourself at risk, even if you have Griffin, because any teams that have 3 quarterbacks, rarely, very rarely will you see all 3 be active on game day, and you're leaving yourself shorthanded elsewhere. So it's way more complicated than just saying, well, Griffin's a better quarterback than Lamar Jackson right now, which, by the way, I would agree with that, but you got to be thinking about the big picture and all the variables at work here.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net, doing some double duty this week. Birds around, and, of course, the other birds on Thursday night, wrapping up this war, this bloodthirst with the Washington Redskins third-string team. That'll happen on Thursday night. As they still call this the Governor's Cup, or am I making that part of it up?
Yeah, it's bad enough when these teams play and it's the first, second, or third preseason game. When it's the final one, I can't muster even an ounce of fake enthusiasm.
Maybe they could borrow the Orioles and the Yankees' fake uniforms for the weekend and wear fake
like
uniforms too. Maybe they could go color rush, and the Redskins could show up here looking like mustard or something like that to run around. But either way, we're getting toward the end. All of it brought to you by our friends at Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. And of course, I'm wearing the Chicken Palooza shirt. Chicken Palooza ends this week. That's where you can win chicken for a year. Every $5 box benefits the Johns Hopkins Children's Center. That's why I bought 2 boxes last week, and I ate all my Western fries. Thank you very much. Also, you get the coffee dumped in the cup, just like I'm drinking from on our WNSTV channel right now. But the ROFO Rewards card is the way to go, as well as the app on your phone. Use that when you pump your gas. You get your points. You'll get your coffee. You'll get your fried chicken, your Western fries free. It's Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. Also brought to you by our friends at Cole Roofing. I have some Rofo Kona in my Cole Roofing coffee mug here each and every morning. Bill Cole's going to join us this week. We had a very, very lengthy, spirited debate. He is my latter-day Dr. Melfi around here. Cole Roofing and Pfister Energy, they do corporate roof spaces and turn that into gold, Jerry, gold. Or at least James Bond. Go out to Cole Roofing and learn more about all that they do. But if you own a company and you have a roof, you need Cole Roofing, and you will at some point. Also brought to you by our friends at Sporticulture. I'm on their website right now. Sporticulture is officially licensed flowers that you send. Beautiful pansy mix, color mums. I got it all. They're going to be behind me on the WNST screen later in the week, as well as throughout the season. And I may actually ask him to send me the Bills plant that week, so we have both plants and look like some NFL Network set or something. We'll have some fun around here, though. It is NFL season. Sporticulture is with us. Go to sporticulture.com and learn about these beautiful flowers. Also, Charles Newsonoff and Sons, they've only been doing it since 1923 over there. Let's grow old together is what they say, and they're growing older right now, celebrating with this 96 years now. It'll be the 96th year. They're out on Harford Road. You can go to charlesnewsonoff.com to learn more. Engagement, celebrating 50th anniversaries, or in this case, birthdays, or anywhere in between, Charles Newsonoff and Sons is your place for jewelry, diamonds, watches, and gifts in exciting new selections she might not even know about. My wife's getting her ring repaired there now, so go see them at Charles Newsonoff in Parkville. All right, Luke, back onto the field and back on the fake football and back onto the fringe of the roster and watching these guys run around. I've been watching Hard Knocks the last couple of weeks, catching up on that a little bit and seeing what the Browns are going to have around the corner for us when we get out there in early October. The fringe side of this roster, for the Ravens fans at least, a bunch of names we're familiar with. Some guys are going to get cut that we've heard of, and then we celebrated in April's from past, right?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. I think it's going to be more so on the defensive side of the ball where they're going to have to cut some notable names. I think offensively, you look at the wide receiver position, I think that's set at least among heralded names. And Brashad Perriman, which I don't know, I'm not really convinced he's even on the bubble at this point. I think that ship is basically sailed unless something really strange happens here over the next week. But I think.
Well, he has not emerged, right?
Well, and he's not playing special teams. He hasn't taken a single special teams rep in a preseason game. How are you going to be the fifth or sixth wide receiver when you don't play any special teams
in the
at
new
all?
NFL, especially, right?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't see. I have listed him on my bubble for my mock roster projection more so as almost a courtesy. He's the first-round pick that they did give a bonus to at the start of the preseason to take a look at him, see what happened. If John Brown got hurt, if Willie Snead got hurt, if Michael Crabtree got hurt, if they had two injuries at the wide receiver position, then yeah, we'd be talking about Perriman a little bit more. But anyway, beyond him, I think you look on the defensive side of the ball and you see guys like Carl Davis, guys like Albert McClellan, Kamale Correa. I think you look at those individuals and you say, okay, well, that looks like a bubble player, and you just look at the numbers on the defensive side of the ball. I think some of my roster projections that I've done, there are upwards of 26, 27 defensive players that you want to keep. When you consider you have three specialists then, that doesn't leave a whole lot on the offensive side of the ball. So you kind of have to try to balance that as much as you can, but it does speak to how many good, talented players they have on the defensive side of the ball. And look, we can debate where the Ravens' high-end defensive talent stacks up to other teams. You can ask the question, where did Terrell Suggs, Eric Weddle, C.J. Mosley, and let's just say Jimmy Smith, like those top four, how do they rank compared to the top four players on other teams' defense? And I'd say it isn't one, but wherever it would be, that doesn't really tell the whole story as far as how deep this defense is. But when you have someone like a Carl Davis who's entering the final year of his rookie contract, who has proven to be a useful, versatile player, and certainly did that last year for them, filling in at the five technique spot, a position he'd never played. But you look at him compared to someone like a Zach Sealer, who's a seventh-round pick. At this point, would be hard-pressed to say that he's as good as Carl Davis, but he's under contract for the next 4 seasons. He's a rookie, and he's shown some capability. He's shown some ability as a five technique where you have Davis who's going to be a free agent. Brent Urban is going to be a free agent after this year, was re-signed on a 1-year deal. So you start to look at these questions where you say, okay, and we always talk about the 80-20 rule, and this isn't exactly like that because Davis isn't making a ton of money. But you do look at some of these younger players and say, all right, maybe this kid isn't quite as good as this veteran player, but we also have him under contract through 2021 compared to that veteran only being under contract for this season. You're going to keep that younger player if it's close. So I think those are the types of decisions that the Ravens are kind of finding themselves in right now. I mentioned Albert McClellan and Kamale Correa. All things being equal, McClellan might be, he's certainly more proven as a role player, but
I think Harbaugh or any of the coaches would feel more comfortable with McClellan, right?
Sure, but he's also 32 and coming off of an ACL injury, and he's making a little bit of real money. This is a guy that, for what he is making some decent money. He's making over $1 million. And you have Correa, who, say what you want about him not developing as a starting player, as a stud defensive player, he's still someone who can play 4 linebacker spots, and last year proved that he's a pretty solid special teams player. Do you keep Correa, who is under contract for an additional year after this one, over McClellan? I think there's an argument to be made that you do. So those are the types of decisions more so on the defensive side of the ball that I think are going to be really interesting for this football team. And now that Willie Henry's going to be out, I think maybe that saves someone like, maybe Carl Davis and Zach Sealer both make the roster, where it might have been one before. But and you're kind of just a good challenge for them that even with the few injuries that they've picked up here recently, they're still, it's a far different animal than what they were dealing with last year, where they already had a number of guys that were earmarked for IR at this point. So that's good that you're healthier, but it does present a challenge that can't keep everybody. And that's where, when I talk about that, that's where I keep going back to the RG3 argument and say, really, you're going to let go of another good young player that might be a contributor for you a couple years down the road, just to have a third quarterback? So, that's what you have to weigh, because there's a hidden cost for every player you want to keep. There's someone else you can't keep. So that's where I think the challenge really is on the defensive side of the ball right now. And Willie Henry being banged up and Jimmy Smith being suspended, even though Jimmy doesn't count against the roster, these are still other things. These are factors now that you have to weigh as far as who you're going to keep and who you're going to let go. So it'll be really interesting come Saturday.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke at on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. All of the cuts coming. Fake football on Thursday night ahead, as well as bad baseball this week. Luke, just get me to September 9th, please. I mean, I know they're going to play some real college football this weekend, and I know every once in a while I can put a baseball game on that has some meaning, but just get me to September 9th. I'm ready for the season to start, man.
I don't think there's any question about that, especially anyone who waited around all day Saturday to watch the Ravens-Dolphins game, and you didn't see Joe Flacco or any of the key veteran players on this team. They were held out, which, by the way, I was completely fine with John Harbaugh making that decision. When you consider a week extra of of training camp because of the Hall of Fame game, an extra preseason game completely, 2 sets of joint practices, I understand Flacco only played 31 snaps in the preseason. In a perfect world, if your offensive line had been completely healthy, instead of Ronnie Stanley, Marshall Yanda, and James Hurst not playing on Saturday, in a perfect world, sure, you'd like to get Joe some more reps, because this is a pivotal season, and you do want to start fast. But when you consider that, when you consider the number of competitive reps that they got this summer with extra training camp and joint practices and the 2 games in which they did play in the preseason, I can understand it. At the same time, when you see what this product is rapidly it's getting worse in the preseason rather than better, I keep saying there has to be a better way for this than gouging fans. And it's not good. It's just not a good product unless you are such a hardcore football junkie who loves watching young players, loves watching guys that you watched in college who might not be projected to be a good NFL player. Beyond that subset, which that's a niche group right there, just not very, very good football. It's just not very captivating in the way that we know the regular season to be. So I'm with you. Let's get through this on Thursday. Anyone that is a lock, anyone that's someone that you think is really going to be meaningful to your success in 2018, wrap that player up in bubble wrap, and we'll see you on September 9th. I mean, it's just that simple.
All right, Luke at WNST.net and Baltimore Luke. Of course, all of our coverage brought to you by our friends at buyatoyota.com. They put it all in the audio vault so you can listen to it when you want, where you want, how you want. It is our podcast home at WNST.net. It's all brought to you by buyatoyota.com. Our morning newspaper ships to your email inbox directly each and every morning at 7 a.m. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life, guaranteed. Also brought to you by the Maryland Jockey Club. They're out at Timonium right now. They'll be back at Laurel next week as well. Love that Charlie Ekman won the first race on Sunday. Not the real Charlie Ekman, Charlie Ekman, the horse, which the coach would have absolutely loved. They are racing away at the Maryland State Fair. They'll be down in Laurel soon enough. Make sure you get down there for football season. The Maryland Million, the DeFrancis Dash, all coming up. Maryland Million, by the way, October the 20th. I'll be 50 by then. We are headed down to Nashville on my 50th birthday. All the information under the Road Trips tab up at WNST.net. This is the real deadline. Today's the day, I swear. Email me if you need anything at all. We're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports. Sorry about that. I had a little